Tell us about what your definition of money is and why it's so significant in your worldview.
Yeah, well, first of all, I might agree that the way this system is currently operating is what is making MMT popular. But the problem is the system is not working. I mean, it's working for the government, but it's not working for the economy. It's not working for the people. And that's the problem that Austrian economists understand. And just, kind of to give you a cliff notes of, what Austrian school is versus, other schools of economic thought, Keynesianism being, probably the most popular right now. But Austrians put the emphasis for economic growth on savings and production, not spending and consumption. And so they look at all fiscal and monetary policy that is trying to stimulate demand as being misguided and actually counterproductive because they put the cart before the horse. Now, a lot of that stimulus comes in the form of money. Hey, let's just print up money and spend it, and that's going to grow the economy. But the Austrians don't see any value added by just printing fiat currency, because when you print money, you don't increase the supply of goods and services to buy with that money. So all that really you have is inflation. You just have more money. So all that really you have is inflation. You just have more money chasing whatever supply of goods and services exists. And so prices go up. What money really is a way to facilitate trade. It is an improvement on barter. See, before money was invented, right? If you were a chair maker and you wanted a pair of shoes, you had to find a guy that made shoes that you liked who also wanted your chairs. So it was a very inefficient way to transact business. But when somebody realized, hey, wait a minute, gold is a very good commodity that we can trade in because it's easily divisible, it's portable, its value is stored, all gold is the same. You don't have to worry about your chair being different or your shoes being different. Every ounce of gold is exactly the same. And even if you yourself don't need the gold because you're not a jeweler, you're not making anything with gold, somebody will. And of course, gold was a luxury good. Most people like to have things made out of gold, whether it was jewelry or other ways they were adorning, their houses with it, or, whatever they had. I mean, gold was inlaid in a lot of goods. And so everybody would want gold, whether you needed it or not. So using money as opposed to barter was a big improvement. And of course, since Austrians look at economic growth as a function of capital investment, which is only financed out of savings, you want to have money that you can save and it will store its value. So when you're using gold as money, it's an ideal mechanism for saving. And so if you have more savings in an economy, you have more capital investment, and then you have more economic growth.
So Mike, it's interesting because you guys both frame this in very different ways. I didn't hear any direct disagreement in terms of Peter's view about the supply side and production rather than something that comes from the demand side and consumption. What are your thoughts about that?
I think part of the challenge, and again, it goes back to how does the system actually work and what are the complaints? We can spend our time worrying that the current system does not place appropriate limits on what the government does to stimulate. And by the way, I actually agree that the way the government spends money or the manner in which stimulus is provided can have a huge impact. But the idea that somehow or another we need to go back to a system that derives the value of money as a commodity or a barter, or that the limitation needs to be the physical dynamics, in my opinion, actually hurts our process. It requires us to move backwards to an extraordinary degree in a manner that is unproductive, right? So the way I would ultimately, or where I would significantly disagree with Peter is I do think that governments can actually positively influence outcomes, right? We've seen this in areas that have good governance, like Singapore. We've seen this in areas that have bad governance, many emerging markets that have failed to emerge. You can point to Zimbabwe, for example. Those poor decisions in terms of how to spend the resources of the state or how to allocate the resources of the state in support of the private sector are really what the complaints are on, right? The rise of the Austrian school was largely a byproduct of the work of Karl Menger in 1871 and the incipient collapse of the Austrian economy following the founders' crash in 1871, right? It was built on the idea that government had overreached and that the money had been spent in the wrong way. I don't necessarily disagree that sometimes governments will improperly spend money, but I don't think the limitation is some commodity function.
Yeah, well, a couple of points I want to make. First of all, on Singapore, there's an old saying, or I don't know if it's an old saying, I think it was Thomas Jefferson, maybe I'm wrong, but the government that governs best governs least. And that's pretty much the success of Singapore, or any country that has limited government, is the less involvement the government has in the economy, the more prosperity the economy enjoys. So that is the secret of places like Singapore or like Hong Kong, in that government was small. It's also the reason that the U.S. prospered during the 19th century. And in fact, and this is a point where I take exception, I think that it's, you can't even argue, but I think the most prosperous period in U.S. history, right, where living standards for the average American rose the most, was probably the period between the end of the Civil War and, let's say, the beginning of the First World War, around that time period, and during that time period, you had phenomenal economic growth, right? You had the whole transformation of the U.S. economy through the Industrial Revolution from a largely, farm-based economy to a manufacturing economy. You had the invention of all sorts of goods that previously never even existed. And so people's lives really got transformed in their living standards. And that was also the purest gold standard up until the beginning of the Federal Reserve. That was the purest gold standard the U.S. ever enjoyed, and that was the most prosperous period in U.S. history. And so having gold as money was not an impediment to economic growth. In fact, it helped foster economic growth. And despite all that rapid economic growth, and also at the same time, America was absorbing millions and millions of immigrants, including all four of my grandparents who came to America during that period from Eastern Europe, right? Lots of people were coming here, and the gold standard worked beautifully. More people coming, more goods and services being produced, and consumer prices declined during that period. With all that economic growth, we didn't see consumer prices going up. We saw consumer prices going down. We saw the value of savings going up. So I don't see how you can say that it would be a step backwards to return to a monetary system that enjoyed so much success. I mean, compared to what we have now, I mean, the complete, collapse, and we go from boom to bust to boom to bust. But, we've basically hollowed out the entire U.S. economy. Under this fiat system, we've gone from the world's biggest creditor to the world's biggest debtor. I mean, the standard of living of average Americans has been destroyed by government. I mean, now, a middle-class family, you have two people barely making a living, whereas prior to that, one person could have a job and support an entire family and have savings. So I think that it's not a step backwards. It's progress to go back to what used to work rather than continue what's failed.